Thanks for coming, and I hope you guys all and gals all had a good time last night. Once again, I can't tell you how much I appreciate Tim Taylor and all that he does to make this outing happen, because it's a lot of fun. So, it is my pleasure now to introduce our speaker today, Nick Biddle. Nick is the founder of Workforce Pro and works with contractors that want to prepare and develop their workforce to lead with impact, act like a pro, and perform at their best on a daily basis. He does this in a variety of different ways, through presentations and workshops, through tools that he has developed, which are designed to support the learning process, and through a unique information delivery system called DRIP Information, which is a registered trademark, by the way.
Appreciate that. Thank you.
He is the architect of 2 performance and improvement process curriculums that use the DRIP information process that are specifically designed to prepare and develop our current and next generation workforce for the roles and responsibilities that lie ahead. Nick is the author of 4 books: Small Business, Big Mistakes, Perform Like the Boss, Good Foreman, Bad Foreman, and Know This, Do That. So it is my pleasure. I was going to go into his Facebook profile, but decided not to. Nick.
Appreciate it. All right. Super. Well, thank you for joining me this morning. My name is Nick Biddle, and just a little bit of housekeeping. If you don't know, the restrooms are around the corner, but we're going to wrap up. We'll be out here by 10 o'clock, so we got about 90 minutes together. I want to talk about 3 things today, all around the title of leadership, field leadership succession. But the first thing is I want to talk about the problem, and then we're going to talk about how to identify this next generation. How do you identify that next foreman before we've ruined them? And I'll explain what I mean by that. And then how do we train them? So those are the 3 things. And I'd really like for this morning to be more of a discussion than a lecture. So if you have ideas, if you disagree with me, if you think I'm wrong, which I could be, let's have that conversation. I would love to have that conversation right here. So how many of you guys can tell from the sound of my voice that I'm a long way from home? Just a little bit. Hear just a little bit of a southern drawl. I did not grow up in this part of the world. I actually grew up on a farm in western Oklahoma. I'm married, been married 21 years. Last week, and I know that's amazing. But and I have 2 kids. I've got a daughter. She's 15. Her name is Elle, and I got a little boy named Cruz, and he is not so little anymore, and he is 13. For the first 15 years, my wife and I were married. We lived in Oklahoma City. That's kind of our big city in Oklahoma. Everything you need in Oklahoma City to raise a family. We had good schools, had good neighbors, had a Walmart, everything you need. And 6 years ago, we moved the kids to a small town out in western Oklahoma. How many of you guys grew up in a small town? Anybody? Somebody did. How many people? Where'd you grow up?
2,300.
2,300. Now, where was this?
Mineral Point, Wisconsin.
Mineral Point, Wisconsin. Is it still 2,300 people?
About that same size. Yes, sir.
I thought maybe once you left, like everybody'd flock in.
I come from 3 bodies.
Okay, there's 2,300. Anybody grow up in a town smaller than 2,300? Anybody? 2,300? Here, give me 5, give me 5. No? 2,300 is the winner? I currently live in a town of 503 people called Corn, Oklahoma. How you guys been to Corn, Oklahoma? Anybody? Don't you guys ever take a vacation? Because if you did, I know this is where you would go. Corn, Oklahoma is a little town out in western Oklahoma. We're about 80 miles west of Oklahoma City. If you've ever gone from Oklahoma City to Amarillo, you've gotten close. Corn has nothing. We don't have a grocery store. We don't have a gas station. We don't have a bank. There's not a Dollar General. There is nothing in Corn, Oklahoma. We do have a post office that's open from noon to 4. We do have a cafe that's open all day, Thursday, Friday, and Saturday, at lunch on Sunday. We also have a co-op. You can see the elevator in the back. That's a picture of downtown Corn, Oklahoma during rush hour. At the elevator, you can get some dog food, you can get a bag of fertilizer, you can get some fuel, but only if you have a charge account because they do not take credit card. And people ask me all the time, they're like, Nick, you can live wherever you want to live. And I can. As long as I can get on an airplane, I can do what I do. They're like, you can live wherever you want to live. Why do you live in Corn, Oklahoma? And sometimes I ask myself that exact same question. But you know, there are certain things a small town will give us, a big city won't. And I know this may sound crazy. I grew up in a small town very close to Corn, Oklahoma. My kids can ride their bikes all around town. I don't have to worry about them. Especially when we moved there, they were smaller. They ride their bikes all around town. I knew if and when they did something stupid, I was going to hear about it because everybody in town had my cell phone number. But that's called accountability. Right now, we got a generation entering the workforce. Some of them, not all of them, but some of them have never been held accountable before in their life. And now we're putting them on your job sites, we're putting them under your leadership, and we're not only having to teach them the trade, we're also having to teach them what it means to be accountable. We were talking last night, and they're like, well, your kids still ride their bikes all around town? And no, they don't. They still ride their bikes some, but I bought a military Humvee 2 years ago, and I always wanted one, so I found one, I bought it. Well, my kids drive that all around town. So, but they've never been stopped. The other day, I saw my daughter, and now she doesn't have a permit yet, but she was running down the highway, going to work with her grandfather on the farm, and she was running down the highway in the Humvee, and all of a sudden I see the highway patrol right behind her, and I thought, oh, here we go. This is it. He didn't stop her. But you couldn't do that in most places in the country. We can get away with that in Corn, Oklahoma. Another thing I like about Corn, Oklahoma, I grew up on a farm out there. Anybody grew up on a farm? Got any farm kids? One, of course. You just want to raise your hand. You're just looking for attention. What did you guys, yeah. I appreciate, I got one person who's awake. What did you guys raise?
Well, we had sheep and cattle.
Sheep? Yeah. That's the worst animal.
It is the worst animal.
I mean.
They were nervous all the time.
Boy, you're bringing it this morning. I'm not even going to go there. I'm so glad you were going to post this online. Yeah. Look what you missed. We, sheep and cattle. We raised a lot of cattle. We had about 4,000 acres of wheat and cotton. And you don't have to grow up on a farm to know how to work, but you can't grow up on a farm and not know how to work. We moved back to Corn, Oklahoma because I wanted my kids to learn a work ethic. I wanted them to know that after school and on the weekends, there's something to do. Right now, they're servicing combines because they're cutting wheat. And so they were cutting wheat last night till about midnight. And I want my kids to know that good things happen when you show up and work. And when I work with apprenticeship programs or contractors all across the country, one of the biggest frustrations I hear is that, man, a lot of these young men and women getting in our industry just don't know how to work yet. And it's changing how we have to lead, because we don't only have to teach them the trade, we also have to teach them how to work. And that changes how we lead. Another thing I like about Corn, Oklahoma, most of the people there, not all of them, but most of them, they say what they mean what they say. They tell you something, you can take it to the bank. They believe their handshake is worth more than their signature. Most of us grew up in a time when that was the case. But what I see on job sites all across the country now is as soon as we get off the phone with somebody, what do we automatically have to do with that conversation? Got to put it in an email. Why do we have to do that? If we don't document it, it didn't happen. And a lot of people tell me, well, that's a communication issue. That's just how communication is. I say, horse hoggy. That's an integrity issue. And it's changing how we have to lead. That is why I live where I live. And I don't know if it's why I talk the way I talk. That's just part of the package. But let's talk a little bit about field leadership succession. In this business, we talk a lot about leadership succession. Typically, it's at the executive level. Mom and dad started the company, or grandma and grandpa started the company. Somebody started the company. And then they're getting to the age where they're wanting to pass it down, and so there needs to be a succession plan in place. But what I see is I see a huge issue with a lack of field leadership succession. We've got a lot of great foremen, general foremen, supervisors, superintendents. They have been with us for a long time, and a lot of them are starting to look like some of us. They're starting to get a little thin on top. They're starting to get some gray hair. And here's what I want you to do. I want you to talk just with the people closest to you, amongst you right now, but how many of your field leaders, foremen, general foremen, supervisors, superintendents, how many of them will be eligible to retire in the next 7 years? And just knee-jerk it. I know you don't, because you probably don't want to know the real truth, but just knee-jerk it. But talk about it, write down a number, and I'm going to give you 4 minutes. 4 minutes, talk about it with the people around you, and come up with a number. What do you think you have in your company? You may not want to share it, but I want you to talk about it anyway. You ready? Go. All right, that wasn't 4 minutes, but that was long enough. Anybody come up with a number or a percentage they want to share? Anybody proud of their number? Anybody proud of their number?
Yeah, we only have a couple.
Just a couple?
Yeah.
And why is that?
Because we went through this phase previously.
You've already been through the pain. And so how was that transition?
It caused some difficulty, you know. I would say that based on the type of work we were doing at the time, it wasn't as difficult for us to transition because the tenant improvement work is kind of like, you know, scene one, scene all for the most part. So
Okay.
the guys were able to pick that up a little easier compared to buildings coming out of the ground.
Sure.
So it wasn't really painful for us, but we did realize now just talking and reiterating the fact that we probably lacked training younger force to be a foreman, you know, before this happened. So we learned from that.
Right. I mean, because a lot of times, I mean, how do we identify our next foreman? I mean, in most of the companies I've been in, we got a job starting on Tuesday, and Monday we're sitting around the table. It's like, who's going to do it? And we grab a set of plans and we hand them to that next guy that just kept showing up. I mean, that's all they did wrong. They just kept showing up. And we hand them this roll of plans and we're like, man, how would you like to run work? And they're just like, ah. And we weren't really asking. We weren't asking. But that's the training they've got. But when I work with field foremen, some of them, especially the old timers, they're proud of that. They love the trial by fire. They're like, no, it's sink or swim. That's how you do it. Nobody told me anything, so I don't need to teach anybody else anything. And maybe it's worked, but I don't know if it continues to work. I think there could be a better way. Regardless of how many individuals you have in your company that are going to need to be replaced, key people in the next 7 years, there's going to be some. I was in Buffalo, New York, speaking at it was kind of like a Christmas deal for a contractor out there. And there's about 300 people in the room, and I didn't okay it with the owner of the company. He was sitting right up here. I just said, hey, anybody that's going to retire in the next, I think I said 7 years, stand up, or who's eligible to retire. 300 people in the room, about 70% of them stood up. And I mean, that guy, he ruined his week. I thought, he's not going to pay me. You know, there it went. But it ruined his week because I had him stand up and look. And we were talking afterwards. He's like, how's this even possible? He said, most of these guys aren't any older than I am. I'm like, but have you looked in the mirror lately? You know, you're old. You're old. So the problem is real. If it's not, if you've already gone through it, man, that's great. If you haven't, it's coming. So how do we identify that young foreman? How do we identify that young field leader before we screw it up or before we ruin them? And what do I mean by that? How does our workforce ruin a good foreman before they're a foreman? What do you think? This is the interactive portion of the event. What do you think? How can we ruin somebody before we ever give them that role plans?
Too much responsibility too early.
Okay, throw them in the deep end too early.
Not setting proper expectations.
And what do you mean by that?
Just giving them responsibility without explaining what you expect of them and what they can do to be successful.
Yeah, my father-in-law is a very successful farmer. He's a really good farmer. This is going online, isn't it? Okay. I don't know if he knows how to use a computer, so it might be okay. But he's a very, and I would tell him this. I haven't, but I would. But he's a very good farmer, very successful. But he's not a great leader. He's a great doer. He's not a great communicator. And he'll take a 15-year-old kid that's never seen a combine before. He'll give him a 50-foot header. Still got plastic on the seats. The sucker probably cost $500,000. And the only training that they will get is get her done. And we say, well, that's crazy. That is crazy because that's a dangerous piece of equipment. It's worth a ton of money. But how often do we take somebody, give them a roll of plans and say, well, let's just see what you got. Do your best. So sometimes we don't set proper expectations. We do not set them up for success. We do not actually train them in the skills that they need to be successful running work. I think another way that we set somebody up for failure is we tell them how horrible this job is going to be their entire career, and then Tuesday morning when we hand them that roll of plans, we act like we're really giving them something here. I've got a client out in Butte, Montana, and I go out there and I work with the apprentices every year. And I remember the first year I was out there, had a bunch of first-year apprentices. I said, how many of you guys want to run work someday? How many hands went up? What do you think? How many percent? What percent? Yeah, it was like 85, 90%. Everybody wanted to run work. Man, that's great. 3 years later, I go back out there. Fourth-year apprentices. How many of you guys still want to run work? How many hands went up? 5%. It was like 2 hands. What changed? What changed in that 3 years? Stimulus checks. Well, this was before that. This was before that, but it's probably worse now. It's probably worse now.
With the peers in the field and their supervisors in the field who basically told them this wasn't, you don't want to run work.
Yeah, every day on the job, their current foreman told them, this is the worst job on the planet. You do not want to do this. Because every time the apprentice or a journeyman would complain about something, the foreman would pull their keys out of their pocket and throw them on the job box and say, you want my job? Take my job. You want my truck? Here it is. I'll put on your tools. This is horrible. And we've talked them out of it. And so by the time they're ready, they're like, no, I don't want that. Or there's so much peer pressure not to do it. So much peer pressure. It's like, no, you don't want that. You're a sellout. Going to become a company man. That is not what you want. The problem is we have got some young people in this business right now. They want it. They're wired to be the boss. There are some people in our business, there are some people in this life, most of you, when the game is on the line, the clock's running down, you want the ball. It's not about the money. It's not about the freedom. You want the ball. That's how you're wired. And we've got some individuals right now who are first-year apprentices, and that's how they're wired, and they want the ball. And we're going to talk them out of it over the next 4 or 5 years. Hopefully not all of them, But I think that's why we've got to do a better job of identifying that next foreman earlier in their career. Get them early. Yeah, they may not know a wire nut from a hammer. That's okay. We'll teach them that. But when we see the skills and the qualities, the gifts, the abilities that make a great leader, man, that's when we got to grab them. That's when we got to grab them. Does that make any sense at all? What we're talking about is transformation. Too often I see leadership development, we think it's a seminar. And don't get me wrong, I do a lot of seminars, I do a lot of workshops. And my kids got to eat, and I like doing them. But to develop a leader, we're really talking about transformation. Slow and steady, long-term process. I told you there is nothing in Corn, Oklahoma. If you see the building on the left that has Corn, Oklahoma on it, that building was originally built in 1929, and I bought that building. And I know you're thinking, what a find, Nick. What a beautiful looking building. But I bought this building, I was looking for an office, and COVID happened, and I thought, now is as good a time as any to create a little project for myself, because I had about 80 programs cancel in about 2 weeks after COVID hit. And so my year just magically opened up. And this guy was wanting to sell this building, and I was wanting to buy it. I was wanting to buy it more than he was wanting to sell it, which means I overpaid. To give you an idea of the real estate market in Corn, Oklahoma, I paid $8,000 for that building, and I overpaid. I'm serious. Nobody knows outside of my audience how much I paid for it. Nobody in Corn knows how much I paid for it except the seller. If they knew, I would be the laughingstock of the town, because it's probably worth $1,500. But I bought this building for $8,000, and I knew for me to turn it into an office, I was going to have to completely transform it. So over the next few months, I put about, I didn't put a ton of money in it. I put about $120,000 in it, and I turned it into my office. But it was a complete transformation from beginning to end. Was this a good investment, dollars and cents? Probably not. What do you think that building's worth today? $7,500, probably. I'm probably still not worth what I paid for it. On paper, the investment doesn't make sense. In my business, it makes a ton of sense. This last year, that building probably saved my marriage. Some of you know what I'm talking about. On a normal year, I'm on 200 airplanes traveling all over the world. During COVID, I'm at home, and my wife's like, "Who are you? Why are you here?" So, but no, it's changed my business. I've built a studio in there, and virtual training's become a thing. And so for me, it was a great investment of my time, energy, and resources. One of the concerns that I hear when we talk about leadership development, especially field leadership development, we always try to look at it with return on investment. Well, am I going to get out of this individual what I put into him? Well, I don't want to start training somebody too quick, because what if they go to my competitor? When you're thinking about transforming somebody into a leader, the dollar and cents investment may not make sense on paper. It may not, at least right away. But I think we still have to make it. Yeah, what if you develop that guy and he goes somewhere else? Yeah, very possible. You know the old saying, what if you don't train them and they stay? We know that. But I think we still have to train them. We still have to develop them. You're gonna lose good people in your company for two reasons. One of two reasons. The one reason is that individual is fleeing a bad relationship. I was working with a company in Pueblo, Colorado, and they had lost some really good leaders. in a short amount of time. And they're like, Nick, we're just losing all of our future talent. We've invested in these people and they're leaving. And we did we spent about a half a day and we kind of figured out, we did a quick org chart, figured out where everybody was positioned in this org chart to see where they were leaving. And they were all fleeing one jerk. There was one jerk that was connected real tight with the owner, and he was an ass. And every good person was leaving. So you will lose people because they are fleeing a bad relationship, or you will lose good people because they believe they've outgrown you. They're like, for me to move up in this organization, somebody has to retire or die. Because they feel like they are trapped. They might be second man in charge on a job. And they don't feel like they're going to ever get past that foreman, that general foreman, that superintendent, whatever it is. So if you are losing good people, go back and look at it. It'll be for one of those two reasons. Let's identify what it takes to build a good foreman. The problem is we're always looking for a leader. And leaders are often hidden. It's hard to see a leader. That when you start to bring more detail to what you're looking for, you start to see more of it. And if you could break down the individual pieces of what makes a great leader, we will easily see those skills and qualities. And you guys have all done this. Think about the last time that you bought a new vehicle. A few years ago, my truck was getting high miles. And my lovely bride, Tarina, she said, you should get a new truck. Because if that thing ever breaks down on the way to the airport, you're screwed. I said, that's a wonderful idea. And I didn't know exactly what I wanted. And I started thinking about it. And I've always been a GMC guy. But man, Ford's doing some good things. And so I started looking at some Fords, and I thought, okay, you know what? I'm gonna cross the line. You may not agree with this decision, but I'm gonna cross the line. I'm gonna get a Ford. But it's got to be a four-door. I knew that. It's got to be a Ford four-door truck. Next trip I head to the airport. What's everybody driving? They're everywhere. Ford four-door trucks. Everybody's got a Ford four-door truck but me. And I thought, well, yeah, they're everywhere. The day before, I'd never seen a Ford four-door truck. I mean, rarely. And then I bring a little more detail to it. And I'm like, well, I got to have four-wheel drive. I mean, because we get 2 inches of snow in Corn, Oklahoma every year. You know, whether you need it or not, we get it. So we got to have four-wheel drive. So I'm like, okay, I got to have a four-wheel drive, four-door truck. Next trip on the way to the airport, what am I passing? Ford four-door trucks, four-wheel drive. Everybody's got them. And I'm like, I'd like this little, just not necessarily a lift kit, but just a little beefier, a little bigger tires on it. And we got a lot of dirt roads, so I had to have white. Next trip, headed to the airport, what's everybody driving? Ford, four-door, white, four-wheel drive trucks. And then a buddy of mine in Oklahoma City, who's an orthopedic surgeon, I'd had to have rotator cuff surgery. He just bought him a brand new Ford Raptor. And I thought, that's what I need. That's what I need. And nobody's got one. I mean, nobody in Corn's got a Raptor. That's what I need. And there's not any in the state. Next time I'm headed to the airport, what's everybody driving? Whew, go right by me, Ford Raptor. I pull into the airport parking lot. What's parked next to me? Ford Raptor. On my way home after my trip, what pulls up to the gas pumps next to me? Ford Raptor. As soon as I identified what I was looking for, I started to see it everywhere. Everybody had a Ford Raptor before I wanted one. I just didn't know what I was looking for. I hadn't brought enough detail to what I was looking for to see it. So I went to the dealership and I found out the price of a four-door Ford Raptor. And I bought a GMC. So, but that's just how I roll. So what makes a great foreman? Some of you are old enough to remember this guy. Who is this? Colonel Steve Austin. Tell me about him. What was his story?
Got hurt and they put him back together.
How'd he get hurt? He was a test pilot. It's like, oh yeah, now it's coming back. Yeah. He was a test pilot and he crashed. What did he tear up? Legs. Eye, arm. And they rebuilt him, right? What did they give him? They gave him legs. They gave him an arm, super strong arm. Could lift 9,000 pounds without leverage. It was impressive. And hearing, there was something with the hearing. And a bionic eye. Pop quiz. How much did the government spend rebuilding him? $4 million. I was actually doing a workshop years ago, and we were talking about this. I had a bunch of foremen, and there was one fella. He'd always break. I mean, he was just that guy that always answered the questions. And I had pop quizzes. My pop quizzes are usually pretty simple. And this poor fella, he'd never get one right. He was just always wrong. And so I felt bad for him, and it was lunchtime, and I was thinking, I need to give this guy a volley, just some low-hanging fruit that he could get. And so that was the first time I asked. I said, pop quiz, how much money did the government spend on this guy? And sure enough, that guy raised a hand. He said, $1 million. And I was like, swing and a miss. Swing and a miss. But I always thought, what if we could build a bionic foreman? What if we could build a foreman from scratch? What if we could decide the characteristics, the skills, the abilities of our next field leader? So if you think about it, if you think about your field leader, their gifts, their skills, their abilities are going to fall into two categories. There's going to be personal skills and there's going to be professional. Give me an example of a personal skill, a good foreman, a $4 million foreman, or $6 million, $4.27 million foreman. What would they be good at? They'd be a great communicator, right? They'd be a great communicator. And how important, do you see how we are? But they'd be a great communicator. How important is that skill? How much time do we spend developing communication skills in our workforce now? Some. We're doing it some, maybe not as much. What else? What's a professional skill that they should be really good at? Okay, could be organized. You're wrong. No, it's knowledge of the trade. Organized is later. No, but they've got to be organized. I mean, how many foremen do we have right now that aren't very organized? They're not keeping track of everything. What else? What else? Skills, personal or professional. What else are you thinking that could be that would make this list? Okay, they'd be a great leader. Time management, absolutely. What else? Normally I'd have you get together in groups and spend 8 minutes building your $20 million foreman. They'd be a great motivator. Do most of our foremen right now even know that's on our radar? And if they do, what does motivator look like to them? How hard I kick somebody in the rear? Maybe. What else? What else would make this list? Good with details. Yep. What else? Accountable. Yep. Accountability. Even hold somebody accountable. A great leader is going to communicate to somebody what they need to do. Man, here's what I need you to do today. But what really makes them great is when they hold them accountable for what did or didn't happen. And that's where it's tough. I've got we talked a little bit about drip information. I've got a drip series, and it's just a short and sharp video, goes out every week. But we're talking about confrontation, because if you're going to hold somebody accountable, you got to deal with confrontation. You got to be okay saying, "Hey, this isn't exactly what I'm looking for." What else? What else would make this list? Loyal. Why is loyal important?
If you're investing a lot of time and money into people, it's gotta go both ways. You want somebody who's, be there for a long time, support them.
Yeah. I mean, you hate to put $6 million into somebody and then they go across the street. You're like, cripes. What else make this list? We'll go through my list. I want somebody that shows up. We're like, well, yeah, that's a given. Is it? Used to be a given. I want them to show up. I want someone that can delegate. Think about delegator. How many leaders do we have right now? They are really good at what they do, but they won't get out of the way. Well, I can do it fast. It's just faster for me to do it. That's not a leader. That's a high performer that we probably put in a wrong position. My father-in-law, love that man. Horrible delegator. He'll have a wheel bearing go out. He's got 3 guys to work for him. And he will get down there and change that wheel bearing, and they will watch him. And then he will get upset with me. These guys won't do nothing. They just stand there and watch me work. I'm like, well, get out of the way. But that's tough to do because it is faster for me to just do it. It's faster for me to do it. Can pass a drug test. Oh, that used to not even make the list. Boy, now it does. Now it does. I want somebody honest. Want somebody honest. I was talking, one of my clients, well, you guys might know Commonwealth Electric, out in, is it Iowa? No, Nebraska. Yeah, I've got a client there, Clint, runs their low voltage division, and he had emailed me this morning, and we were talking, and he knew, we're building a house in Corn, Oklahoma, which is a lot worse financial decision than buying a building. But he was talking about when he was a journeyman, he was building a house, and his foreman said, if you're building a house while you're working for me, I'm going to fire you. Well, he said, I'm going to lay you off. He said, why are you going to do that? He said, because if you're building a house, you will either steal time from me or you will steal materials. He's like, what? He said, I know that because that's what I did. So he said, Clint, I know you will do the same. But it's like honesty. Had an electrical contractor in Pueblo, Colorado. His best foreman sent him out of state for a job. And it was some type of government job. So it took like a year. And he said when it was all over with, the numbers didn't add up. And they started digging into it, and they found out that while this guy had a crew, and the crew was actually in Oklahoma working, they were doing side jobs. And all the material was billed to the job they were doing. He said all in all, over that year, $800,000. Honest. You got the best producer in the world. If they're not honest, they're going to be in the wrong position. Need to be a mentor. There's a difference between being a leader and being a mentor. It's a different set of skills. Leadership happens on the job. Mentorship happens over a cup of coffee. My little boy, Cruz, when we moved to Corn, he was 7 years old. Cruz's favorite thing in the world is breakfast. Not his favorite meal, his favorite thing in the world. You give him an option between Christmas and breakfast, he'll choose breakfast. That's just how he is. He's also an early riser. He'd think anything after 5:30 in the morning is a complete waste of time. He's always like, Daddy, why does anybody sleep past 5:30? mean, he wants to get up and do something. And we just moved to Corn, and he was excited that the cafe was there. And I was actually in Oakland doing workshops that first week. I was coming home on Friday night. I had a layover in Vegas, and I was called the kids. My wife told them good night, because it was going to be, my flight wasn't going to land until midnight. It's going to be 2 a.m. before I rolled in the drive. And my little 7-year-old boy, Cruz, gets on the phone. He said, "Hey, Daddy, we're going to have breakfast in the morning." I said, "Sure, buddy, we'll have breakfast." He said, "All right, I'll get you up at 5:30. I said, "Don't you dare get me up at 5:30. I said, I'm coming from California to Central Time. I said, "Buddy, they're going to serve breakfast till 10 o'clock. He said, "Daddy, but the cafe opens at 6. I said, "It doesn't matter when they open. It only matters when they close." I said, we can get breakfast anytime. I said, "Let's go have breakfast at like 7:30 or 8 when normal people eat breakfast on Saturday." He said, "Oh, Daddy, that'll never work." I said, "Actually, it will. I prove it to you. It will work." He got real quiet. I mean, have you ever tried to argue with a 7-year-old? He said, "Well, Daddy," he said, "I'll just go by myself." I said, "Go by yourself?" He said, "Yeah, I'll go by myself." I said, "All right, I think that's a pretty good idea." He hands the phone to Mama. He runs off to bed. Mama gets on the phone. She said, "What'd you tell the little boy he could do?" I said, "Oh, sweetheart, he probably won't even do it." She said, "He cannot go have breakfast by himself." I said, "Babe," I said, "I'll be home tonight." I said, "It's no big deal." I said, "He's probably not going to get it." And she's like, "He cannot go." Have you ever tried to argue with your spouse? You know, it does not work. My flight was boarding, so I got off the phone, and I pulled in the drive at 2 a.m., crawled in bed. Doesn't seem like I closed my eyes, and I hear his alarm going off. I look down the hall, I see the light start shining underneath his door. Pretty soon I hear him sliding open his dresser doors. I hear him shaking his piggy bank. And I'm like, "Dadgummit, he's going to do this." My wife's got the boniest elbow on the planet, and she is wearing out my short ribs. And she's like, "You need to get up and stop him. This was your idea." And I said, "Sweetheart, let's just see what happens." See, I knew 5:45 was the moment of truth. At 5:45, he's going to open that front door. He's going to look outside. And when he looks outside, what's he going to see? What's he going to see at 5:45 in the morning? Nothing. Yeah, darkness. And little kids are scared of the dark. You can hear that door slowly open, 5:45, and you could hear him looking outside. Man, it was so early the moon wasn't out. He takes one step outside, closes the door behind him, he's gone. My wife's like, "Get up and get him." I said, "Oh, sweetheart, let's see what happens." Susan owns the cafe. I knew Susan would call me if there's a problem. I never heard from Susan. Later that morning, I went down to the cafe. Susan said, "Nick, I almost called you this morning." I said, "Well, I figured you did." I said, "Tell me what happened." Now, Corn Cafe is like any small town cafe in the country. In the middle of the cafe is about 4 tables pushed together. And at 6 o'clock in the morning, who's sitting around those tables? It's all the old guys. It's all the old guys. It's all the old farmers. They're sitting around their table. They're drinking coffee, and they're telling lies. It's the same lies they told last week. This week, they're bigger. She said this morning, at 6 o'clock in the morning, your little boy walked in like he owned the place, pulled up a chair right there with him. She said it was the first time every one of those old guys shut up at the same time. Then he looked up at Susan. My 7-year-old boy, Cruz, he ordered a short stack of pancakes, scrambled eggs, some bacon, and a cup of coffee. And he started drinking coffee with those old guys. He's been doing it every day since. Is he learning something from those old guys? Yeah. Sometimes I get home and I've got some splaining to do. Yeah, he's learning some stuff. Some of it's, wow. When he was 11, they started giving him relationship advice. Started working on his pickup lines. Some of them were horrible. Some of them were phenomenal. I'm like, that might work. You know, we throw the word mentorship around a lot in this business. Mentorship happens a whole lot more over a cup of coffee than it does a set of plans. Mentorship's a whole lot more about relationships than it is about tools, tactics, and techniques. And sometimes I think we get that wrong. Because riddle me this. If my little boy right now, if he needs anything in this life that one of those old guys could give him, would they give it to him? Oh, in a heartbeat. And they wouldn't give it to him because they don't have anybody else to invest in. Because every one of those old guys got a dozen grandkids. And it's not like those old guys don't have anything better to do, because no, farmers don't retire. They're kind of like you guys. They just work. They got thousands of acres to farm, so they don't have time. But they're going to give it to my little boy because they have a relationship with him, because he put in the time. Our current foreman, our general foreman, our superintendents, are they willing to sit down and have a cup of coffee with somebody new coming up in this business? Do we give them the time to do it? If we don't, we're missing an opportunity. And I know, dadgummit, Nick, that time, that cost a lot of money. I get it. Transformation doesn't necessarily make sense on paper right away. Yeah, what if I invest in this individual and they leave? They might. They might. But we got to develop mentors. Drive, man, that's a personal skill. That drive, show up on time. Invest in yourself on your own time, your own dime. That's one of the things I'm always talking to apprentices about. It's like, you want to be successful in this business? Invest in yourself. Don't wait for a class to show up. I was working with it was sheet metal guys, and there was an individual in leadership role, and he was super young. And I asked this guy, I was like, "Who's your uncle?" He's like, "What are you talking about?" I said, "You're way too young to be in this type of role. I mean, what's going on here?" He said, "No, Nick," he said, "I'm first generation sheet metal worker. This is just what I do. I just care about what I do, and I get up and do it." And I said, "What changed?" I said, "What made the difference in your career? What behavior did you have? What did you do different that gave you an advantage?" And he said, "Well, nothing. I just kept showing up." I said, "I'm not buying it." And I kept working on him, and he finally said, "You know what?" He said, I just found favor with my boss." And I'm like, "Well, what did you do to find favor with your boss, who was a foreman?" And we kept digging, and he finally said, "You know, I taught myself to weld." I said, "Tell me the story." He said, "We were on a job," and he said, "I didn't know how to weld, and they needed a welder, and I was complaining that they had a small apprenticeship program. Welding wasn't offered till next year, because it was every other year." And he said, "I was upset that I couldn't learn to weld for another year." And my foreman said, "You know what? If you want to learn to weld, go buy you a welder and learn to weld. Quit making excuses." And he said, "So I went to Harbor Freight, bought the cheapest welder I could find, the only one I could afford. I got some scrap steel. I started watching YouTube videos, and I taught myself to weld in my garage." And he said a few months had passed, and my foreman was asking me, we were talking, and I told him what I did, and he said, "What are you talking about?" He said, "Yeah, you told me to teach myself to weld, so I went and bought a welder." He said, "Really?" He said, "Do you want to become certified?" He said, "Absolutely." He said, "Well, my buddy's a CWI. He said, come to my shop for the next couple of weekends," and he said, "We'll get you on some heavier equipment." And he said, "We'll get you to pass that test." And he did, and they did. But he said, "You know, that set me apart, because all of a sudden my foreman started looking at me differently, and he started saying, you know, this kid cares. This kid's got some drive. This kid invests in himself." And he said, so that led me to a leadership role sooner, and word got out, and he said, now I find myself where I am today. But we got to be able to find that drive. Got to be able to find that drive. Got to be organized. We talked about that. Good with people. Is this important? Good with people. I am amazed how a lot of individuals in our industry don't see this as a value. When I'm working with young foremen, they don't see good with people as something that's important, but it is critical. Somebody that can read people. I want to know if that individual's upset. I want to know if they're tuned out. I want to know if they're getting it or they're not. Work ethic. That one goes without saying. Teacher at heart. We've got some individuals in leadership role right now, they do not want to teach. There's that old mindset, well, if I teach them everything I know, then they won't, the boss isn't going to need me. I was in northern Michigan. It's like right here, way up there. And I had a workshop. I was working with some guys, and there was a couple of superintendents in the room, and I had dinner with the owner of their company the night before, and he was so frustrated that his superintendents wouldn't teach anybody. And I was talking to these guys at lunch, and I just said, how are things going, and who are you grooming? I said, you guys are getting old. Who are you grooming to take your role? And they're like, well, if I teach this guy everything I know, the boss is going to fire me. What's sad is the boss was telling me the night before, if these guys would be willing to teach somebody everything they knew, I would put them in a mentor role. I would take them out of their role. I'd give them a raise, and I would put them over 3 or 4 superintendents and have them mentor these superintendents. It was never communicated to them because they thought, well, if I teach somebody, I'm going to get fired. And really, if they would start teaching, they would actually become more successful. We got to have somebody that's smart. We got to have somebody that's a decision maker. Loyal, we've talked about loyalty. Top producer. Humble. And safe. We're really good at teaching a couple things on this list. What are we really good at teaching? What do you think? What do you think? Show up on time? Safety. We teach safety. Didn't always. What else are we really good at teaching? Knowledge of the trade. Knowledge of the trade and safety. I don't think there's anybody better than us. Or you. It's not me. It's you guys. What about everything else? There's certain things on this list you can teach. You can teach somebody to be good with people. You can teach them to be a great communicator. You can teach somebody how to be a leader, how to be a mentor. You can teach somebody how to read people, to be organized, how to make decisions, how to delegate. Most of the stuff on the professional side we can easily teach. Some of the stuff on the personal side you can teach. You can teach somebody to be a good communicator, good with people. Clearly, we can't teach somebody to pass a drug test, not legally. But think about what we're looking for in that next foreman. If you think about the 3, 4, 5 things on here that are most important that we can't teach, man, those are the things we should be looking for. Think about that first-year apprentice. How long do you need to work with somebody to know if they're honest, have drive, and show up? 1 day? Some of those things take longer. Loyalty, somebody could fool us for a while, right? Work ethic, well, that shows up quick. The problem is, a lot of times we judge people by how good they are at the professional skills, or really the knowledge of the trade. I was in Coos Bay, Oregon, right on the coast, and I was working with some electricians. There was a guy named Dave, and Dave was at the end of his career, and he said, Nick, the first 3 years of my apprenticeship, I was in the truck. I said, you were in the truck? I said, were you in like a service department? He said, no, I wasn't in service. He said, I'd go to the job, and I would do something wrong. My boss would be like, oh, hell, Dave, go sit in the truck. You do less damage in the truck. And he said, I literally sat in the truck for 3 years. For 3 years. Well, the problem with Dave's boss is he was not a leader. He definitely wasn't a mentor, and he wasn't a teacher at heart. He was just looking for somebody that's a top producer. Was Dave ever going to get an opportunity to run work? Not from that guy. Now, I don't know Dave's story, but my guess is Dave left that boss. He went somewhere else and sat in the truck somewhere else. That's right. When we're thinking about who our next foremen are going to be in 3, 4, 5 years, man, think about the personal skills. And then when you find that individual, man, pull them aside and just say, hey, I know you're just getting started in this business, and you don't know a hammer from a saw right now, and I get it. But, man, I got big plans for your future. And you put them with a foreman that's going to teach them. Let that foreman know, we're going to develop this individual. I want you to start exposing them to some best practices, some ideas. Most of the time, what I see is our leaders, we think we're doing a pretty good job of teaching this stuff. I was doing a workshop, I don't remember where, it don't matter, but I had one guy in the room and he said, I teach everything on that list. I said, really? Man, you're awesome. I said, how do you teach it? He said, I lead by example. I said, oh, it just rolls off the tongue so smooth. It's very humble. Humility, that's right. And I didn't even put it on this list, but one of the things on their list was conflict resolution. I said, what are you really good at? I said, like, if you had to pick one, and I know that's hard, but I said, if you had to pick one, what would you pick? He said, oh, conflict. He said, I'm good with conflict. He said, you got a bad situation. He said, I can go in there, and in 4 minutes, everybody's happy to change order signed. I said, that's fantastic. I said, tell me about the last time you resolved some conflict. He said, oh, it was 3 days ago. This is what we did, and this is how it happened. I said, that is awesome. I said, who'd you take in there with you? He said, what are you talking about? I said, well, you lead by example. I said, so who was the young man or woman that you drug into that meeting with you and said, hey, we got some conflict here and I'm going to resolve it and I just want you to watch? He said, well, no, they had to stay, they're working. I said, if we're leading by example, how's somebody ever going to see that example in a different building? We might be leading by example, but if we're leading by example, we need to be more deliberate about leading by example. If somebody's going to lead by example, they need to take that young man or woman that they're grooming and say, hey, you're going to deal with conflict a lot in this trade, and I'm going to show you how to do it. So I want you to follow me into this hornet's nest that we're getting ready to walk into, and I want you to stand there and don't say a dadgum word, and just watch what happens. And then you go in there, and they said this, and I did this, and then they threw that at me, and I did that, and then they come out, and the conflict's resolved. And I said, and then you go and you debrief. It's like, okay, now did you see what happened? That's leading by example. Most of the time, we're not leading by example. We're not deliberate about it. I don't think you have to bring somebody in from outside to teach most of this stuff. You've got the resources in your company right now. There's individuals on your jobs right now who are organized. You've got some foreman right now, and you're like, yeah, that's our most organized foreman. Just have them share what they already know with everybody else. I've got a client, and a scorecard's probably a bad example, but they keep a scorecard on those individuals they're grooming. It's like, here's what you're good at, here's what we need to sharpen. And if they aren't organized, they're going to put them with that foreman on the next job, and it's like, hey, you're going to work, but you're also going to learn how to be organized, and this guy's going to teach you the system. And just be a little more deliberate about what we teach. A lot of people say you can't teach drive. I think you can. Drive. The problem with drive is we try to motivate others by our needs. If you think about your current field leaders, it's like, I got a deadline to hit, you need to find a higher gear. Well, you don't care about my deadline. You care about what's going on in your life. We have to teach our foremen, our superintendents, our general foremen, how to identify what drives those they lead. I was out in California working with some mechanical guys, some general foremen, and this general foreman, he had an apprentice. He said, all the potential in the world, no drive. And we started digging into him, like, well, why isn't there any drive? And why do a lot of the young people getting in this business, why don't they have much drive right now? They haven't been pushed? Okay. What pushes you? Right. Well, you've had a kick in the rear, probably, by looking at you a couple, right? But why am I here? Because I'm a multi-millionaire and I just want to be hanging out with you guys. But I got bills. There's things I like to do. My wife is building a home in Corn, Oklahoma. It's a horrible idea. Thank you, Pinterest and Instagram. You've ruined my life. Right? But no, we are all driven by things in our life. We have things that we want. We've got bills. Most of us give ourselves way too credit for our work ethic, for our drive. Most of us will work a heck of a lot harder to survive than we ever will to get ahead. Think about this. When's the last time, and maybe at your company, that you got behind, or things got tight, or the pipeline dried up? Might have been today. You know, this last year has really thrown a lot of us into some turmoil. And we started looking at those numbers and we're like, dadgum, there's nothing in the pipeline. All these jobs have been put on hold. And what do we start to do? What do we start to do to our efforts to generate more revenue? And we get creative, right? Some of us have developed new divisions this year. Some of us have relooked at how we do. Some of us have changed our margins. But we start kicking our sales team in the rear. And we're like, get out there and sell something. And then what do we do to our spending? Boy, we tighten the belt. We tighten it up. We do this at their company level. We do this at home. Like, yeah, we're not going to spend that money this year. We're not going to take that vacation. We're not going to do this. We're not going to buy that car. Whatever it is, we tighten the belt. And then as soon as we get past that, what do we automatically do? Take our foot off the gas. We're like, whew, man, that was close. That was tight. We all have a comfort level. Some of you, it's so much money in the pipeline. Some people, it's so much cash in the bank. It's so much backlog. Whatever it is, we have that comfort level. And when we are there, we tend to take our foot off the gas. Now, there's a few people that don't. There's a few people that they're just 100 mile an hour, and good for you. But most of us, we take our foot off the gas. The difference is most of us, we need 60 hours a week to survive. But now we got a generation entering the workforce. How many hours a week do they need to survive? 2, 30, 25. With stimulus checks, nothing. Think about it. It's changed things. Where are most of them living? They're at home in the basement. I was having dinner with some contractors. This guy was complaining about his son. He said, I just can't get my son to work. I said, tell me about your son. He said, well, he's got his own personal suite in the basement. My wife bought him a lazy boy. I'm like, a lazy boy? I'm like, how many channels does he have? He said, I don't know, 400. And I said, who does his laundry? Oh, Mama does his laundry. I'm like, so this guy has got a suite in the basement. Mom does his laundry. He's got 400 channels. You probably have fried chicken every Thursday. And you're wondering why he won't get out of the house and do anything? I said, the problem isn't your son. The problem's you. He didn't like to hear that. But we got a generation in our workforce, some of them don't need the money. They don't need the money. And this individual I was working with in California, he said, man, I've got this guy. He's got all the potential in the world. But he don't need it. And I said, no. I said, you got to stir that up. I said, a great teacher, a great mentor is going to stir up what somebody wants. And I said, take him out for a cup of coffee and ask him about his 10-year plan. I said, he won't have one, but I said, don't let him get out of it. And so he did. He sat down with him. He said, man, what do you want to do someday? He said, I know you're living at home right now. You don't have a family, but do you want a family someday? And the young man said, yeah. I mean, someday I do. I do want a wife and kids. He's like, great. So are you going to live at home? He said, well, no. He said, so do you want your own place someday? Well, yeah, I guess someday. He said, well, how much is that going to cost? And this kid said, I don't know. He said, here's your homework for this week. Go find out. Go find out what it would cost for you to have your own place. And he said, we're going to have a cup of coffee next week. I'm going to ask you. Next week they got together. He said, boss, I found out real estate prices in Southern California. I'm not going to have my own place. So it's just not going to happen. And I forget, it was either, a condo was either $600,000 or $800,000. It was one of those two. Stupid money. And his boss looked at him and he's like, well, why can't you have your own place? He said, well, that's way too much money. He said, yeah, but your wage package? He said, we got unlimited overtime right now. He said, how much down money would you need to buy your own place? He said, I don't know. He said, guess what? He said, that's my homework. He said, that's right. Next week, he said, I got to have so much down. He said, how long would that take you to save up? They figured out he could have his own place in 2 years. 2 years later, I went back there. And that young man was in the foreman's meeting. And we talked. I said, what changed? He said, this whole time, I was getting kicked in the rear because of something my boss wanted, and I was never working for something that I wanted. When I started working for something I wanted, things changed. And he had just bought his own place. A great leader, a great mentor is going to stir up into somebody what they want. They're going to find that drive. My little boy Cruz, I tell stories about my kids. He's an easy target. Doesn't have the greatest work ethic. His sister will work like a rented mule. She works. She loves it. You got to force him to work. He's always trying to find out how to get out of work. And I can kick him in the rear all I want, and it really doesn't help. But I have to figure out what drives him. And when he was 9 years old, he walked through the front door, and he just got home from school, and he said, Dad, I made a decision. I said, talk to me about this decision. What decision did you make? He said, I'm going to be a millionaire. I said, it's a good decision. I like where this is going. I said, how are you going to do that? He said, it's easy. He said, I just bought this book, How to Turn $100 into $1 Million. I said, that's fantastic. I said, read the book and let me know how to do it. He said, I already read the book, Dad. I said, really? I said, how do you do it? He said, it's 3 simple steps. Turn $100 into $1 million. I said, I got to hear him. He said, earn, save, and invest. I said, I should have wrote that book. I said, talk to me about earning. He said, Dad, I'm pretty good at earning. I said, are you? He said, yeah. He said, I got a cow that has a calf every year. And he said, last year we sold that calf for $800. I said, that's true. He said, Dad, we got the bee business. We've got some honeybees, Little Biddles bees. It's their business. They sell honey. He said, last year we sold 400 pounds of honey, $10 a pound. I said, yeah, that was good. He said, them old guys bought up a lot of honey. I said, yeah. He said, we do lemonade stand with my sister on the weekends. And he said, you'd be surprised how big of tips we get from those little old ladies. I said, yeah. And he said, I work on the farm for Pops every once in a while. And he said, you would be surprised how fast $2.25 an hour adds up. I said, I'm sure I would. I said, you got a pretty good handle on earning. I said, talk to me about the next step. He said, the next step is to save. I said, yep. Now I know this is where he struggles. I said, how you at saving? He started looking at his boots. He said, well, I'm not very good, Dad. He said, I really like Legos. Dadgum Legos, you know, those things are expensive. I said, yeah. And Crew's also a sucker for a good concession stand. You go to the football games, and he is at the concession stand. And our football concession stand has a sign on the front door. It says, no charge accounts, but they let him have a tab. And we'll have a football field. And the game's going, high school game's going, and he'll be playing with all his buddies in the little patch of grass outside of the end zone. And they're rolling around in the grass, covered in dirt. And one of his buddies will say, oh, Cruz, I'm dying of thirst. And he'll say, go get you a Coke. Put it on my tab. First night, he run up a $40 tab at the concession stand. But he had to take his own money, he had to pay for it. I said, yeah, we got to work on saving. I said, what's the third step? Turning $100 into $1 million. He said, Dad, third step is to invest. I said, talk to me about investing. He said, Dad, I have no idea what that means. I said, most people don't. It's hard to teach a 9-year-old how to invest. And I said, well, when you put your money, and your money works for you, you put money into something. And we were sitting in my office and I had a copy of my book, Good Foreman, Bad Foreman. And I said, Cruz, I invested in this little book. I said, it took me time to write it. I had to hire somebody to print it and design the cover and edit it. But I said, every time I sell a copy of that book, I get a return on my investment. And I don't know, we'd sold 20,000, 30,000 copies of that book at that time. And he looked at me and he said, when you write your next book? And I said, well, I'm writing another book right now. And he said, how would you like an investor? And I said, let me talk to Mama and let's create a plan, a path that makes sense for everybody. And I said, I'll get back with you. And 2 weeks later, I came back to him and I said, here's the deal. I said, if you will earn and save $500, new money, can't be money you've already saved up. You got to earn and save $500 in the next 90 days. I will let you invest in my next book. He said, what do I get? I said, that's the right question. I said, you get 75 cents a copy for every copy we sell for the first 5,000 copies because I always print them in 5,000 at a time. He said, all right. What happened to his work ethic? Shot through the roof. He immediately called Pops. He said, Pops, can we start on the farm at 7 o'clock tomorrow? He wanted to get in a 12-hour day because he knew that'd be over $20. He took the rest of the honey down to the cafe the next morning and he sold it. Next football game, he closed his tab, shut it down. They're playing in the grass. Buddy comes up with the ball, ear full of grass. Oh, Cruz, I'm dying of thirst. I need a Coke. Cruz looked at him. He said, you don't need a Coke. You need a job. He earned and he saved that $500 in 90 days. Wrote me a check. We got him checking account. First check he ever wrote was to his father. I thought, this is how it should be. I was writing this book, know this, do that. It's for apprentices or anybody wanting to build a successful career. And he invested in that book. We sold the first 5,000 copies in about 60 days. He got $3,750 check, royalty, for that. He immediately got out his checkbook, wrote out a check for $1,000, said, Dad, on the next run, let's print 10,000. And we did. I could have kicked him in the rear till I wore my boots out, trying to get him to be driven for what I wanted. Would not work. If we're going to be a great leader, we have to identify what does that next foreman want in their life? All we are is a vehicle to help them get that. When we can show somebody that a leadership role in our organization gives you what you want in life, there's nothing that's going to stop them. But if all we're worried about is our deadline, our next job, Nobody's motivated by that except us, because that's what's driving us. Figure out what's driving them. Does this make any sense at all? And I do have, I threw books in my suitcase. I'm not here to sell anything, but if anybody would like a copy, I do not want to take those home. You can have them, they're free. And I got 3 of the Good Foreman and, I don't know, 6 or 7 of the Know This, Do That. Let's see where we're at. So, what conversations are we having? I think an important part of, what are those conversations that we're having with our foreman? We want our current leaders to identify this next generation that's going to hop in and lead, but are we talking to our current foreman and general foreman about it? I mean, at the end of the job, what questions are we asking? We're typically asking, well, how did the job go? How much, how are our hours? What do our costs look like? Do we talk to them about who they're developing, who they're grooming? If we're not having those conversations, I think we're missing the boat. What's measured is managed. Do we measure leadership development? Do we place any expectations on our current foreman for who they should be developing, how many they should be developing, who they're looking for? And I've worked with tens of thousands of foremen. Most of them would tell me, my boss does not care about leadership development whatsoever. And I'll say, why not? And they're like, because we never talk about it. At the end of the job, they just want to know, did it get done on time? Did it get done on budget? That's it. They don't care about leadership development because we don't talk about it. What's measured is managed. What's rewarded is repeated. Start having more conversations about who you're developing, who do you see? The other problem is, do you think there's anybody in your organization right now that would make a great field leader? And they want that shot, but they're not getting it. Think about it. If you got a new job starting on next Tuesday, and you need all your foremen are on current jobs, they're all spread too thin. So you're needing somebody new. And you call your foreman and just say, man, we got this new job starting, and I don't want to spread you guys any thinner than you already are, but who's your best guy? Who's your best guy? Because I'd like to take them off your job, and I'd like to give them their own job. How many of those guys raise their hands? Anybody want to give up their best guy? Why not? It's their best guy. I just got this guy groomed up. I got this gal, she's answering most of the questions. She's making my job easier. I'm not going to give you my best guy, but I do have somebody for you, Rick. I got a winner. I got one. So do you think there's what about that number 2 person? Do you think there's anybody in the number 2 spot right now that's frustrated? Absolutely is. Why will we lose good people? One reason, they will flee a bad relationship. What's the other reason? No room for them. They're like, I'll never get past my boss. I'll never get past them. If you ever lose good people, man, look at that. Because I think we've got individuals in our company right now who love the responsibility. But we got to find them. I want to talk real briefly, I'm running out of time, about how we're doing this. So one of the things that when I first got started years ago, we would go into the apprenticeship program and teach leadership development to everybody. But what I found out real quick is not everybody is going to be a leader. Not everybody wants that. Yeah, that's SEAL. I've got a cousin that's a SEAL. That dude, I would not mess with him. That dude, he'd kill you with a spoon, you wouldn't even know it. But leadership isn't for everybody. And when I first got started, we would teach all apprentices leadership. It was like, we're going to groom everybody to be a foreman. And what happened is we got a strong resistance from those individuals who didn't want it at all. And they started screaming, why do we have to learn all this crap? I don't want to do this. And we ended up, it killed the program for everybody. What we've been doing a lot more of lately, and I've been incorporated into either bigger companies or chapters, is we will create an elite leadership opportunity for a select group of apprentices. And what we've typically been focusing on is third year. We figured after the first 2 years, they kind of know what they're getting into. And we would create a select opportunity for individuals who want more out of this career. And we keep it small. They have to apply. They had to write an essay. They had to get a referral from a contractor and a foreman. So they had to jump through some hoops. They got to have some skin in the game. And then we would pull them through foreman training. And I would teach some of it, but we had a lot of our contractors come in and teach parts of it. That was probably a lot better than the stuff I did. They'd come in, give them the perspective of the contractor. And we'd pull them off the job 1 day a month for about a year and pull them through this program. And then they got a designation and this, hey, they're elite. And then we do it again. That has worked a lot better than trying to teach everybody, in my opinion. Now, your situation might be different, but that has worked. Any questions about that? Any questions about anything that I've said? Super, because I didn't like a bunch of stupid questions. So I appreciate that. I know one of you was like, I got this question. No, thank you for not asking a question. But I would encourage you, if you are looking to develop future leaders, be a little more, try to ask yourself, how do I be more deliberate about it? And maybe there is an opportunity to create a leadership track. You may already have it though, but a leadership track for maybe your third or fourth year apprentices to really groom them. What I would want to do is you'd want to get a hold of them before we ruin them, before we convince them that this is a bad deal. None of us figured this out on our own. Every one of us had somebody in our life that was that foreman, that mentor, that teacher at heart that invested in us. One of the things I often hear from foremen is, no one had to teach me any of this crap, so why should I have to teach them? And that's just not true. We all had somebody. Now, maybe we learned it at 5 years old. Maybe we didn't learn it at 22. But every one of us had somebody. And I want you to think real quick, who in your life made the difference? Who in your life invested in you? Maybe they didn't have to, but because they invested in you, you now find yourself in a completely different place than you would be otherwise. Maybe it was a foreman. Maybe it was a contractor when you were getting started. Maybe it was your dad or your mom. Maybe it was an uncle. Maybe it was a coach that kicked you in the rear, pushed you a little harder. We all had maybe 2, 3, 5, 7 people in our lives that pushed us. Here's what I want you to do. I want you to just write down the first name of somebody that you think of that made the difference in your life. And you can write it down real small. You can write it down in code so the person sitting next to you doesn't see it. You can just pick up a pen and pretend to write somebody's name down. I will not know. But I want to give you 6 seconds to write somebody's name down. Go. Okay, who'd you write down? Who'd you write down?
I wrote down my father.
What'd your father do?
Well, he's not here with us anymore, but he was a machinist, but he just had the most patience with you and teach you stuff. He would take the time, no matter what it was. And he just told you you'd make mistakes.
Wow.
But I never became a machinist because that 100,000th of an inch, it didn't
Yeah.
really matter.
So where would you be today had he not been patient with you?
I wouldn't have taught people when I grew up with the apprenticeship. When I had the drive to be
Yeah.
I don't wanna always have someone tell me what to do.
Right. Patient. Yeah. You know, they didn't even make our list. Right. Man, that's great. Somebody else. Who'd you write down? Not all at once.
Steve, who was a guy that ran the theater in the high school I worked for. And he taught me how to use every single construction tool I know how to use today. And when we built sets, if we were off by 1/8 of an inch, we had to tear it apart. Now, you know anything about the theater, you can't see 1/8 of an inch from the front row.
Right.
But it didn't make any difference to him. And
Do it
so
right.
He taught me how to be detail-oriented and accurate. And it's changed everything. And that was from a guy in high school.
Yeah, is Steve right? Does he have any idea the impact he had on you? No.
I don't think so.
Right. Somebody else. Yeah.
Chief Walters,
Chief Walters. Now, who's Chief Walters?
he was Marine DI when we worked at OCS, and he had me do things I never thought I was capable of.
Push you. And how did that change you?
There's nothing that you can't do.
Yeah. Right. You know, every one of us we got 2, 3, 4 people in our life that pushed us further, that invested in us, even if they didn't have to. Steve could have told you that's good enough. Your dad could have been like my dad, not so patient. Now I'll ask you this question. I'm not going to have you answer it. We're not going to share answers. I just want you to think about it. But if I put everybody in this room that you know, everybody you've ever run into, everybody that's ever worked with you or pick you out of a lineup, and I would ask them that exact same question, who invested in you? Even if they didn't have to, that made the difference. How many of them would write down your name? So much of our life is focused on how do we get ahead, how do we become more successful, how do we become more profitable. Most of us are here because somebody invested in us, even though they didn't have to. And right now, we got a generation entering the workforce, and some of them, not all of them, but some of them, haven't had somebody like your dad to invest in them. They didn't have somebody like Steve. For some of the individuals in this workforce, you or their foreman on the job or their GF or whoever, that is the last person who is in line that can make a significant difference. I think one of the greatest investments we can make is in the life of another person. And yeah, I think it'll lead to more market share and more profit and better times, but ultimately, man, it's about building up people. We keep our focus on that. I think good things will happen. Guys, if you would like a copy of one of these books, just come grab it. I appreciate you, and thank you for having me. Thanks.
Thanks, Mitch. That made me think a lot. Something I don't often do. But I do want to talk to your son Cruz because I want to talk to him about a distributorship. I only get $8 a pound for my honey, and if he can get the difference between 8 and 10, I'll split it with him. So, anyways, thank you so much. That was really enlightening. Please come take a copy of the book. Don't rush all down at one time. That's all we have, right?
That's it.
Drive carefully on the way home, and thanks for coming. We appreciate your attendance.